Welcome to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast, hosted by William Wolfe. Our mission is to cultivate courageous and biblical Baptist leadership for the 21st century. We aim to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention from within, defend it from those who seek its destruction, and serve as a better Baptist voice in the public square.
Welcome to this edition of the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, William Wolfe, and we have a very important and timely topic of conversation today. The question facing us and all of the evangelical world is this: has Wheaton College, the evangelical Harvard, gone woke? This is a question that many people have been asking over the last many years now, as increasing examples of wokeness and liberalism on Wheaton College's campus have come to light. But most recently, this conversation was re-sparked again when they congratulated a notable alumni, Russ Vought, for his successful confirmation to the Office of Management and Budget under Donald Trump, and then they deleted that congratulation. Joining me here today to discuss this is Eric Teetsel with the Center for Renewing America and a Wheaton alum, and my good friend Daniel Davis, who is a conservative communications specialist and expert in Washington, D.C., and also a Wheaton alum. Eric and Daniel, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you, William.
All right, guys. So why has Wheaton College been in the news nonstop for the last 2 weeks? I'll answer that question first and then turn it over to you. It's because the one of the most well-known Wheaton graduates in recent time, Russ Vought, was recently confirmed to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget, a very high-ranking and important position in the federal government under Trump. Russ previously served in that position in the first Trump administration, then started the Center for Renewing America afterwards. Wheaton College posted a pretty benign congratulatory Facebook post for Russ after his confirmation, faced immediate backlash, and then pulled it down and apologized. So that's what's brought Wheaton back into the national conversation. And as such, people have been digging into what's really happening at Wheaton College these days. Is it the evangelical Harvard, or is it another sign and symbol of wokeness and compromise at a Christian institution in America? Guys, let me turn it over to you to get your reactions on what happened with the Russ de-congratulation and give us the state of play at Wheaton from your perspective. We'll start with Eric and then go to Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, William. Good summary. That pretty much sums up the most recent events. I'll just say for myself, I was extremely heartened to see that post from Wheaton. I was traveling at the time, and it organically showed up in my newsfeed, and I thought, wow, look at that. They actually did that because Russ has basically been ignored by his alma mater for the entirety of his career, in spite of the fact that he's been in some very key and important roles within government throughout that career, including serving as director of the Office of Management and Budget previously. You wouldn't know it. He's never been invited to speak on campus, never been invited to talk to a poli-sci class, to speak at chapel, never been profiled in the Alumni magazine, none of it. Which is, okay, that's not why Russ does this. He's not looking for accolades from his alma mater, but you would think that a college would want to promote such a distinguished and successful alum, especially one whose work is consistent with at the values of at least a wide swath of the people who choose to send their kids there. Somebody who has explicitly done scholarship on questions like, what is Christian nationalism and are we a Christian country, which would be of interest to people who send their kids to a Christian college in a place like Wheaton, you would think. And for the first time, they acknowledged that he exists. So, okay, that's good. That's a place to start. Alas, as soon as I saw the post, I started to read the comments and realized that the hordes of angry alums who apparently were taught not to share my values, screaming about Project 2025 and all of these other liberal boogeymen that Russ, I suppose, is supposed to represent. And the college just completely kowtowed. We have a word for this. It's called the heckler's veto. And rather than just turning off the comments and letting their as you put it, perfectly benign. Congratulations. Let's pray for this guy post stand. They instead deleted it and then apologized for it and said that they never intended to get the school embroiled in a political scandal, which is nonsense, of course. It was only a scandal to the extent that they allowed other people to dictate that it was one. And of course, the Barbra Streisand effect then happens, and now the cover-up becomes worse than the supposed crime. And here we are. And I think I can say safely for Daniel that if this Russ Vought thing had been the only example of Wheaton doing things that were sort of disappointing and unacceptable over the last several years, we probably just would have shrugged our shoulders and rolled our eyes and moved on. But it is only the latest in a long string of incidents that suggest that Wheaton is adrift and has been for a really long time.
Yeah, well summarized, Eric. Daniel, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I actually had a road trip with my wife planned for that Saturday and ended up being a little bit interrupted just by what happened. I was also pleasantly surprised to see the initial post. I don't think I've ever seen Wheaton post a supportive message on Facebook for one of its conservative alumni. It's possible they have. I just haven't seen it. It's not what they're known for. And yeah, I mean, some of the alums, people that I knew, were weighing in pretty viciously, which was discouraging. And then, as Eric said, the response by Wheaton really encapsulated, I think, the rot in the leadership at Wheaton that I have seen since my time on campus 10 to 15 years ago, which has only borne more and more bad fruit in recent years. And it's essentially, if I had to define it, it's a weakness in the face of mobs and a desire to seek the path of least resistance in order to keep a kind of false peace. And that may have worked 30 or 40 years ago when we were in, as what Aaron Wren might describe as the positive world, and we weren't dealing with so many cultural and ideological threats from outside. Today, it does not work, and it's a recipe for leading an institution away from its mission.
Yeah, well said, both of you. And I think, Eric, you really touched on the cover-up being worse than the crime because, Wheaton didn't do something that was political. They simply did something that was, we could say, initially honorable. They finally recognized one of their most successful political alumni. It is fascinating to me that you mentioned that Russ has never been invited to campus. Russ, who has been an elder at a Baptist church, has never been invited to speak in chapel or even to address a class there. It is essentially a soft cancellation by sort of turning a blind eye to a conservative. But at the same time, we know that Wheaton has no problem platforming political progressives. I mean, they hosted Tim Alberta and Curtis Chang, who are both essentially dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, although Alberta pretends not to be because he's a journalist, on campus. I believe they've had other people like David French, et cetera. So,
to your point, William, when I was a student there, I started out as a poli-sci major, and I think I had to sit through at least two classes where an old congressman named Jim McDermott from Washington State came. Jim McDermott was a Wheaton alum, but he was a Democrat representing some district in Washington. He was one of the most progressive members of Congress, and they had no problem inviting that guy to come. And I remember getting the sort of like weird glances and laughter under the breath when I, as this innocent freshman in class, would sort of like raise my hand and ask, what about babies that your party wants to exterminate? And, it's just, I guess I wasn't one of the cool kids who understood that that's not the kind of thing at Wheaton you're supposed to care about.
Yeah. So the response here set off quite a few articles. I'll just rifle off a few for folks to refer to. One was called The Anatomy of a Steer by Joe Rigney at American Reformer. That was one of the first responses, went fairly viral, in which Rigney argues that, they're not just drifting into liberalism, they're being actively steered into embracing a sort of fusion between progressivism and Christianity, both theologically and then, of course, the way it works out politically. Then, Daniel, you had an excellent piece piece at First Things, God and Man at Wheaton. And, I thought you had some really hard-hitting lines in there. Just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to want to write that piece and really go as far as saying that to the great sadness of many alumni who, like me, can no longer wish to see our children attend. So you just let the world know that you're a Wheaton grad, you pay tens of thousands of dollars to go there, and you would not recommend this institution or send your children there.
Yeah, it wasn't fun to write that piece. I have all the gratitude in the world for my parents who paid for the education, my professors who I took. There are. I do want to say this, and I mentioned it in the piece. There are still some great professors at Wheaton if you know who to take and who to avoid. The problem is a lot of students don't know who to take and who to avoid. And, the professors that represent the best of Wheaton, I wish they were the entire experience, but they're not. So, this has been years in the making. I've been out of college for over 10 years, but since I've left Wheaton, I've met more and more recent alums who have had experiences on campus that just confirm the drift. And some recent examples, we could go back to my time on campus when, conversations on race started to take an identitarian turn. We could, talk about Rosaria Butterfield coming to campus and getting protested by 100 students outside the chapel. That happened my senior year. To the administration's credit, they defended her right to be on campus, and they had invited her. But more recently, the chaplain was fired in 2020 because he allegedly made some jokes that were insensitive, culturally insensitive, and that coupled with a Title IX complaint against him, which was weaponized against him, resulted in his termination by President Reagan. We also had a plaque in the chapel that was honoring Jim Elliot and his team of missionary martyrs who died in Ecuador. We had that plaque taken down and replaced by President Reagan because a few students were offended at the word savage, which was commonplace in the 1950s when that plaque was made. And then the library was renamed. So the school did a study on the history of racism at Wheaton, a college founded by abolitionists in 1860. And the library, it turns out, was named after Oliver J. Buswell, who, according to the report, acceded to pressure for a few years in the 1930s and allowed a policy of segregation, which he later changed his mind on. But apparently that was irredeemable, and his name had to be scrubbed from the library. So these are examples of cancel culture really infecting what should be a gospel-centered, grace-centered campus that is grounded in the blood of Christ, which cleanses all of us and allows us to appreciate the good while mourning the bad. But, we don't delete and erase our biblical heroes like David, who did atrocious things, but was also used by God. Mm-hmm. So I think these are instances of the college losing sight of what should be a gospel culture. And President Reagan, who himself, this is another point I'll make. President Reagan, I believe, is a good man who is personally orthodox and sound. He was a pastor of 10th Pres in the PCA prior to coming to Wheaton. He has great books that he's written on theology. But I think what we've seen over the last 15 years is that being personally orthodox is very different from being able to lead and protect an entire institution in its orthodoxy. And he's just proved to be a peacemaker, and he has not expelled the bad actors from campus. In fact, he's appeased them.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important point, Daniel, which is at the end of the day, President Reagan's personal orthodoxy really isn't the question here. The question is fundamentally, how is he leading Wheaton College? And from all the data points that I've been gathering as I've dove into this, he is leading it fundamentally in an aggressively liberal direction, or you could say he is allowing the progressive element at Wheaton to take the reins over. So either it's cowardice or it's compromise, right? It's one of the two. Now, Eric, in your responses to this, you've engaged some people who are trying to argue there's nothing to see here. Just recently, there was a professor at Wheaton who published at Church Leaders, a professor by the name of Timothy Larson. And he said, my simple plea is that you don't just cherry pick the evidence that fits the decline narrative, but take an honest look at what Wheaton as a whole is like today. President Riken is a conservative Presbyterian minister, a complementarian, and a founder of the Gospel Coalition. If he is woke, the word is broke. This is a classic sort of nothing to see here tactic, smoke screen tactic I've seen from people and institutions that are compromising. So, Eric, when you hear him say that, let's take an honest look at Wheaton as a whole as it is today. I mean, what's your answer? Whose side does the data bear out here? Everything's fine, or we've got a serious problem?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Dr. Larson is one of those guys that I think Daniel's referring to, where, if the school was full of Dr. Larsons, we probably wouldn't be here right now. And I'm sure in his class, he does an excellent job of providing students with a world-class theological education, even if it's one that I don't necessarily subscribe to every tenet of. From what I can tell, he seems to be right in line. The problem is not that. The problem is not even the example that he gave of a professor who encouraged his students to read Marx. This is one of the things that's been frustrating to me, as we so clearly articulate in our response to all of this that we are not afraid of ideas. Not by any means. In fact, we honor the fact that the courageous exploration of ideas is the point of a Christian education, and that when you base a Christian education in the idea that all truth is God's, no matter where it is found, you are therefore more free to fully engage in the world of ideas, because you don't have anything to be afraid of. You just have to evaluate every idea you come across against the baseline, which is the Word of God and Scripture. That's how you know what ideas are good, what ideas are mostly good with some problems, and what ideas are just flat out lies and unacceptable and of the enemy, right? So yeah, read Marx, but don't just read Marx. Critically evaluate Marx in light of what the Scripture teaches us about the nature of man, right? About the world that God created and about the values that he would have us to follow. A good teacher will do that. I myself had instances with professors at Wheaton who didn't share my views on economics. And you know what? I was a better person and today am better at the job I do because I had to critically work through their ideas with regard to capitalism and some of the negative side effects that a capitalist approach to the economy has wrought. And in fact, we're right now living through a conservative populist movement where those very same critiques are at the forefront of what conservatives are talking about when it comes to economics in the world. I'm more equipped because I had a professor who was progressive on economic questions while a student at Wheaton. And the Bible provides space for that sort of evaluation of economics. Economics is not a gospel issue. It's not an issue on which the very nature of our Lord and Savior is at question in the world that he created. It's one where there is room for prudential disagreement among believers about how this all plays out. None of that is the problem. The problem is people who intentionally undermine Orthodox Christian teachings as affirmed in Wheaton College's statement of faith, which every faculty member, staff member, and student is required to sign. Those are guerrilla warriors for a progressive agenda. They are knowingly and intentionally and willfully undermining the statement of faith in their classrooms. And they tend to close the door just before they do it because they know they're doing it. And this happens on theological issues where they teach things like referring to God as a woman. Or it happens on issues of human sexuality, where they affirm the notion of gender identity and gender affirming care, or same-sex marriage, same-sex orientation, and on and on and on. And it happens with regard to all of the woke DEI, anti-white racist stuff that we've seen permeate our culture for so long.
Yeah, it seems to me that really the question here isn't or that we want Wheaton to be sort of the spot for the next MAGA rally, right? Nobody's asking that Wheaton is going to host JD Vance to launch his 2028 presidential campaign. What you are asking for, and what these now 1,200 plus Wheaton alum are asking for on this letter that is being led for Wheaton, and we'll get to that in a second, is that Wheaton hires, teaches, and practices according to its statement of faith. Is that a correct summary?
Yeah, that is a correct summary. We want there to be a baseline that is trustable and verifiable, and because the problem is Wheaton has, and part of the context of this is that Wheaton has had a really glowing reputation in the evangelical world for a long time. Billy Graham is known as our most famous alum. People like Carl F.H. Henry, John Piper, A.W. Tozer. We could go down the list of alums who really have represented Wheaton well, and so Wheaton's been trading on that reputation for a long time, and they can point to their statement of faith and say that, look, we're upholding orthodoxy. But when reality on the ground falls well short of that reputation, that's when parents and students are deceived. And so our concern and our heart in this is, the reason I felt morally compelled to speak out in the article is I do not want to see generations of our best and brightest Christians sent to a school where they think they're going to be equipped to think faithfully as Christians, and instead they're fed CRT, or they're taught that God is both a father and a mother, or they're taught that universal salvation is a valid option. This is what George Kalantzis has taught in the classrooms, although I think he hasn't publicly denied it, but this is what several students have confirmed to me. They don't go to Wheaton expecting to be mocked openly in the classroom if they hold to a 6-day creation view, which has happened. I mean, that's on our website. You can go to forwheaton.org and click on the Our Stories page, and there's dozens of stories like this. And so our concern is, look, we just want truth in advertising. People deserve to know what they're paying for, and the church deserves better.
Yeah, well, let me pull up the For Wheaton page here, guys, because we have about 20 more minutes of this conversation, and I want to make sure that we get into what the conservative Orthodox Wheaton alum and community is asking for here. And the reason this conversation is so important, why I wanted you guys on the Center for Baptist Leadership podcast to talk about it, is one, I believe it's a righteous cause. Two, I sympathize as a Covenant College graduate. I think we need a for Covenant effort as well. And then three, most fundamentally, is that what's happening at Wheaton is really a microcosm of what's happening everywhere across the evangelical Christian landscape in America right now, whether it's at particular Christian colleges like Wheaton, like Covenant, and others, or Covenant Seminary, which has become a hotbed of liberalism as well, or in denominations like the PCA, where just in the last few days, we've seen that, a PCA church has been having a major PCA figure come and host a racially segregated church fellowship dinner, which were, of course, Wheaton had a racially segregated graduation as well last year, which is just sort of insane DEI policies, fights we're fighting in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I want to hear how you two are helping sort of organize, for lack of a better term, a community to demand and seek real positive and biblical change at Wheaton. So that leads me to your For Wheaton, the For Wheaton letter here, in which you guys essentially you lay out a lot of these issues here that you've covered so far. And then here's sort of your action items. You're saying, until such a time as significant changes have been made on these priorities, we are committed to one or more of the following actions: cease all financial support to the college, declining to recommend Wheaton to prospective students and their parents, and to sharing examples of institutional drift with friends, fellow parishioners, online audiences, or the press, to ensure students and parents who are considering Wheaton are aware of the disconnect between what is advertised in the statement of faith and what is really happening on campus. So this letter now has over 1,200 signatures. So Eric, Daniel, please talk to us about, what you hope to see this letter accomplish. I see what your goals are. Do you feel like you're getting there? Do you feel like you have a chance of success here? What's the state of play?
Yeah, great questions. And it's not a coincidence that you're seeing this at Wheaton, and you're also seeing it at other institutions. Like, for example, Christianity Today magazine, which is also based in Wheaton, which was also founded, if I'm not mistaken, by Billy Graham and Carl F. H. Henry during.
Yes, Christianity Today, not Wheaton. I messed that up because I was thinking earlier today, I said Wheaton was founded by Billy Graham. That's not true. He's a notable alum, but that's because Christianity Today was founded by Billy Graham. Right.
And there's not an official, but definitely a historic tie between those institutions. And they've drifted in the same way. Anyone who's paying attention to what CT's up to these days would see that. Not a coincidence. And you're exactly right, too, that you are seeing the same exact drift in other institutions of Christian higher education. I would also point out, however, that you are seeing the exact opposite at a select few other institutions of Christian higher education, and that those places are thriving. And that's one of the fundamental ironies in all of this for me personally, is that at a time when the market for higher education generally is not exactly bullish, and for Christian, expensive, small, private Christian liberal arts colleges, even more so, it's not the right time to double down on a sort of baptized version of the same junk that you would get at any other liberal arts college, Christian or not. It's too easy for parents to send their children to the local state school for a third of the cost and get involved in a vibrant campus ministry, right? If you're just going to get the same thing. The only distinctive that would cause a parent or grandparent or student to take out loans to go to a small Christian college is because they're getting something they can't get anywhere else, which is the sort of training in how to integrate faith and learning in a distinct way, and to be equipped to go out into the world as a bold, courageous witness for the gospel in whatever sphere that God would call you to. So that's what we're seeking for Wheaton to return to, for Christ and his kingdom. And there's a few specifics that we mentioned in the letter. One is specifically for the Board of Trustees to take seriously the state of the college, and we think a need for new leadership. It's just simply the case that President Riken has been there now for, I think, 15 years. Most of this drift has occurred under his watch, and not without his knowing. This letter is not the first time that these issues have been brought to him. We have heard countless examples, firsthand accounts of people who brought specific problems to his office, and he's never taken any steps to remedy any of it, which makes him culpable. Putting an end to the DEI regime, every multicultural affairs officer who's out there propagating this stuff. We think there needs to be an audit of every single faculty and staff member's commitment to the statement of faith. As we have said, and let me reiterate, we do not think that every single person on campus is a bad actor. Far from it. But somehow along the way, wolves have been allowed into the flock, and they are currently operating. And there has to be something done to suss out who has a genuine commitment to the statement of faith and is living it out in their work, and who is a snake. And we need to get rid of the bad actors. Fourth, Daniel alluded to the problems of Title IX and other federal laws with regard to employment and the way they've been weaponized in certain cases against both students, faculty, and staff members. That's not how a Christian college ought to operate, which isn't to say you don't hold people accountable and that there cannot and should not be discipline in situations that warrant it. Of course there should, but they shouldn't look like the world. And then fifth is affirming free speech and this competition of ideas. We're not afraid of ideas. It's the other side that's afraid of ideas. It's the other side that is censoring speech and that is making it hard for those who have opposing viewpoints to be heard within the bounds of Christian orthodoxy. And we think that Wheaton has a lot to do to get back to that kind of a culture.
Yeah, well, I mean, those seem like very reasonable asks, and it reminds me a little bit of the sort of the banned books argument where we're talking about like people are saying, oh, you're banning books because you don't want elementary school kids to read, like essentially like softcore LGBT porn, right? It's not like you can't go get those books, but it's not appropriate for it to be here. And like in the Wheaton context, it's not like you guys are trying to ban ideas being, debated and exposed to the people at the college, whether that's critical race theory or DEI or, the latest gender studies material. But if Wheaton's going to say we are an Orthodox Christian college that believes in man-woman marriage, that believes in the immutable biological reality of in the beginning he created them male and female, that believes in the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ and the inerrancy of the scriptures, you're going to place all of these ideas in the context of gospel faithfulness. And at the end of the day, the gospel orthodoxy faithfulness should come out on top. That's what free speech on a Christian college campus looks like. So you guys also have these action items: stop giving, stop recommending it, and essentially keep exposing what's happening there. Do you guys feel like you're getting traction with these action items? And do you think that actually real change is possible? I'll tell you, my time working on SBC, every single day, people tell me, quit, give it up. I'm not there yet. So what are you guys hearing in terms of the Wheaton fight? Do you have a chance at getting leadership changes, securing this institutional revitalization, or is this a lost cause?
I mean, what happens is ultimately in the Lord's hands. We're trusting him in this. But this is just the beginning of a process. We've seen people coming out of the woodwork saying, thank you for writing this letter. Thank you for giving voice to the concerns I've had for years, which is so reassuring to know that these are experiences that faithful constituents of Wheaton have had for a long time. And so they're finally getting a voice. And I think that the college is, they don't know the amount of money they're about to lose. And I don't think we even know either. As this gets more traction, as we blast it out to more alumni, you could see a big financial shortfall in fundraising, that sort of thing. That's the kind of pressure we're trying to bring to bear. So, this is just the beginning. It shouldn't take financial pressure to bring a Christian college to bear like this. That you really shouldn't be making theological and higher ed decisions purely based on money. But unfortunately, that's the situation we're in, and we're happy to do that.
Eric, what about you? Success of this fight, is it really just the beginning? I mean, you've had how many? Over 1,200 people sign this letter in less than a week?
Yeah, zeroing in on 1,300 alums, not to mention another 600 plus parents, faculty members, former staffers, grandparents, and other people who love Wheaton and want to see it flourish, who have joined this movement too. I'll tell you, I have heard that the initial response from the administration to this was nothing to see here. This will blow over. I can see why they would think that, because things have happened in the past and they have blown over. They don't understand that this isn't going to blow over. Enough is enough. And we are not going to let off the gas until we see sufficient response. I don't know ultimately what that will mean. There's a world in which, as we start to promote some of the detailed, specific concerns we have with regard to individual faculty members, and that's coming, that maybe someone will lose their job. And maybe if one person loses their job, that will cause other faculty members to go, okay, either I need to stay in line lest the same thing happen to me, or I need to find a new place to work where I feel like I can actually do whatever it is that I want to do. Maybe God will use it in that way. Maybe he won't. I don't know. Maybe Wheaton will die or just become the next, SMU,
Calvin College,
or TCU, or whatever or Baylor, or whatever it might be. I hope not. God doesn't need Wheaton, but I know that he would like to have Wheaton be a part of advancing his kingdom. And if there's one thing that I, as someone who has been saved through the redemptive power of his grace, if there's one thing I know, it's that redemption is real and that it's never too late.
Well, fundamentally, it sounds though like the real kicker here is a need for a change in leadership, right, guys? I mean, that's the first ask in the for Wheaton letter. There is new leadership. I mean, and so I'm not trying to put either one of you on the spot, but I feel like you both said it already. Is it your opinion as a Wheaton alum that President Riken needs to go? It's time for new leadership at the top of Wheaton.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's in our letter, and that's one of the concrete goals that we're seeking. A president of an institution can do so much to turn it around. I mean, you look at the experience of Al Mohler at Southern Seminary in the 90s. You look at Tom White over at Cedarville over the last 10 to 15 years. This has happened before. It just takes will and leadership, and President Riken's not the guy.
Yeah,
I will add, actually, can I just add one thing on that? Starting in my time on campus, and then even for years afterward, I didn't speak publicly about this because I trusted that Phil Riken was going to work and making headway on things like this. My senior year, he was kind enough to have office hours, and he gave me about 20 to 30 minutes of his time, and I shared these concerns with him, and he was polite and diplomatic. And I thought, okay, this guy is conservative and he's orthodox. He's going to be doing good things, at least trying to stem the tide. I think the last 10 years have told a different story.
Yeah. It's not to say he's not a good person. And it's not to say that in some contexts he's not a good leader. But there are certain leaders who are needed for certain periods of time. And this is a time when institutions of higher education they are the front lines for what is ultimately a spiritual battle for the soul of the church, for the soul of the country, and for individual souls. The Bible teaches us that Satan is prowling around like a lion looking for someone to devour. We know that the nations are raging against the Lord, right, and his created order. Well, why would Wheaton not be a prime target of the enemy, right? If you were Satan, isn't this the kind of institution that you would want to target, to take out, right? Imagine having a place, Billy Graham's alma mater, where parents feel safe sending their kids. They must be getting a good Christ-centered education there. And you go in, and all of a sudden, all of these unbiblical ideas have been baptized and sanctioned by this institution. And you're sending people back out into the world who have been taught lies under the name of Christian. What a weapon that would be in Satan's arsenal. We have to be vigilant about that reality. And we haven't been, and it requires a certain kind of leader to recognize that. And there's no evidence that Phil Riken is that kind of leader.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that makes sense. And I've thought a lot about the parallels to Southern, and what Mohler did there. And fundamentally, it was a top-down change, right? And we're seeing similar things in our federal government right now, right? Like, it wouldn't be enough just to, fire a couple bad acting bureaucrats, right? Trump is enacting a major change across all the federal government through the power of will off of popular election vote. And when Mohler took over Southern in the early 90s, I mean, the guy had to clean house. He had to fire a lot of people. He had to make everybody adhere to the abstract of principles and really change. And he had the trustee board backing him, which that's another thing too. And sort of to make this, a little bit more of like a meta point to kind of close out on is that, the trustees are ultimately the ones who are going to have to replace the president, right? I assume that's the way it works at Wheaton.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so you'll need to get trustees who are willing to pick a man for this moment to lead sort of a radical change in the overall culture and commitments at Wheaton. And it really will come through one man. So, I mean, I wish you all the best in this quest. And it sounds like really it hinges on whether or not you can get a new president to take Wheaton back to its commitments that it held at its founding, that are found in Scripture. And really, that's the whole game here. So, guys, with our last few minutes, just give a closing call to action to your fellow Wheaton alums and Wheaton appreciators out there. And if there's any place you want to recommend for more information on that, share that with the audience.
You want to do it, Daniel?
Yeah, you can go to our website where we have our public letter to the trustees. It's forwheaton.org. You can sign it even if you're not an alum, because we have a separate signing spot for family and friends of Wheaton. And so you can sign that, and please share it with as many people as possible. Sharing this letter and getting friends and alumni on board is the way to bring financial pressure to bear on the institution and create leverage that we haven't had in the past, but hopefully we'll have now. And then I would just ask for prayer. This is ultimately our desire is to see God do something special at Wheaton. Institutions have been recovered in the past, and Eric said it's never too late. And I think of there's a line in the book of Hosea where he says, "I've heard of God's works of old, but do it again in our day." Mm-hmm. And so I think of revivals and turnarounds at other institutions, and I think how great would it be for that to happen at Wheaton? And but God doesn't let those things just happen in the strength of man. He wants prayer, and he's ultimately the one who accomplishes those victories. So I would just ask for everyone's prayer.
Well said. Eric, is this for Wheaton site where people can find, you said there will be more information about maybe faculty members or things like that. Is this where people who are interested in what's happening should stay focused, or is there anywhere else they should be looking to?
Yep, this is the place. More to come on that front. We will also be organizing, hopefully, meetings with members of the board of trustees for signers to attend in person at a place near where they live. If there is a member of the board who happens to reside in a place near you, we'll see if they take us up on that. It's one of the many avenues that we're planning to go down in order to really get in front of people and make sure that they understand how serious this is and that we're not letting up. So more to come on that front. But if you sign up the letter, you will also get on an email list and be apprised of all the developments.
Great. Well, we had a hard stop at 5:00, so we're going to hit it, guys. Thank you for joining. That website again is forwheaton.org. And in case anybody thinks this is in any way, shape, or form being overblown, I'll remind folks that I believe tomorrow they're going to be having intra-faith dialogue, faith and feminism, Christian and Muslim dialogue on gender and tradition on the campus of Wheaton College. So much work to be done. Many of us will be praying for the success of this effort, brothers. Thank you so much for stepping up to fight this institutional fight. And I'll close with this. It makes me think of when Christ commands us to let our light shine before men and to not put it under a bushel. And this compromise at Wheaton has led this great light in the evangelical, academic, and higher education world to be put under a bushel and a cloud of many things that are, quite frankly, contrary to the gospel. And our hope and our prayer is that cloud and that bushel would be removed and the bright light of Wheaton would shine forth again and help equip the next generation of Christians to engage confidently and forthrightly and without compromise in this world that God has given us. Daniel, Eric, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hopefully have you on next time for an update when you win.
Thanks, William.
Thanks, William.
The Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast is powered by American Reformer, hosted by William Wolfe, with audio production by Jared Cummings. Our music is a custom remix of Soldiers of Christ in Truth Arrayed, the official hymn of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. To help CBL reform and revitalize Christian institutions, please consider making a generous donation today at centerforbaptistleadership.org.